everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my monthly reading wrap up for May. This month was crazy. Your girl was reading. May was a big month for me. I mean, look at this stack. Yeah, I was busy. This month was an amazing reading month for me. I was able to just accomplish reading so many books, and books that I had been wanting to read for quite a while actually. So I'm excited to share with you all of the books I read, and also would love to hear what you're reading. So feel free to comment below what was one of your favorite books that you read this May. I would love to hear. I'm gonna just start with The Bangers, one of my favorite books of the entire year. I'm obsessed with this book, as I'm sure are many other people. Anytime I pre-order a book, there is extreme hype around it. This one really hit the mark for me. I gave this 5 stars. Book Lovers by Emily Henry. If you guys have read Beach Read or People We Meet on Vacation, this is the same author, and those are two of my favorite books. I really enjoy romance, and specifically I enjoy Emily Henry's romance. She is really good at building tension and angst between two characters, and it makes the romance so believable for me. And there's also a lot of good backstory, so I feel like I am not just focused on these characters falling in love, I'm also curious about their lives, and I think they're actually interesting people that I would want to read about. I don't want to reveal too much of the plot when it comes to books. I feel like it's kind of good to go in with a blind view of the synopsis. The synopsis sometimes on the back can reveal things that you would find more interesting if you were just reading the book and got surprised along the way. So I don't want to reveal too much about this book, but it is about Nora Stevens. She's a literary agent and she's living in New York City. She's a total shark. She is so good at her job. She's not apologetic for it, and she's very cutthroat when it comes to business. And I think that's one of the things I like about her so much, is that she's such a girl boss. It was so enjoyable to read. Her personality is one you can just relate to so much. Nora Stevens, she takes a break. She leaves New York City with her sister on this vacation. Her sister has proposed. They go to this very small town called Sunshine Falls, and she happens to run into, I believe his name is Charlie Lastra. Her and Charlie Lastra have met in New York before, and he's also in the literary world. He's an editor, I believe, and their tension throughout this book is so good. These characters, you will just fall in love with them. Emily Henry's books are only like 350-page books. I would read 700 pages about these characters if she wrote that. 5 stars for me. This is a hit. You need to read this. Other book that I just loved. I ate this up. I read this in one day. This book is Daisy Jones and the Six. I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is also by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I want to say I did not give that book 5 stars. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't think it was like life-changing. This book is so good. And it's really cool because it's not written in a normal style. It's actually written from the perspective of an interviewer is like interviewing this band that is from the 1960s, I think. It's kind of loosely based on, I believe, Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac, but I will say it's not something that you have to know anything about the 1960s or this band. So it's written in an interview style, so it's all dialogue. Somehow Taylor Jenkins Reid makes it to where you are able to just follow along as like listening to a conversation, kind of like podcast style. I guess just a little bit of the synopsis for this book. This book is about Daisy Jones. So Daisy is in LA, and she is just a party girl. She is trying to make her way in the world of music as a singer and a composer. She wants to write her own songs. She just parties hard. It's the 60s. It's all about sex and drugs and rock and roll, and she meets up with this band called The Six. They're hesitant to take her on at first, but they know that they're better together. They create this album together. So you're following this band telling their journey throughout the tours of the 60s. And one thing that I really loved about this book, it's like years in the past that they're talking about going on tour and stuff. The exact same event that happened will be interpreted so differently by 2 different characters, and I really love that because it just shows you that memory is so subjective and there's always 2 sides to a story. I found that just to be a really interesting perspective. Another thing about this book is there are just so many good quotes. I'm not someone who tabs their books or anything. This one, I just had to take a step back and like tab the book because I was like, this quote is so good. So I'll just read you a quote from the book that I think is so good. It says, "All I will say is that you show up for your friends on their hardest days, and you hold their hand through the roughest parts. Life is about who is holding your hand, and I think whose hand you commit to holding." And I just love that. Read this if you have not. Just trust me on this one. If I hadn't said it already, 5 stars for me. Love this. Another book that I thought was so incredible. I don't know if banger is the right word. I think that this is something that is kind of interesting and important to read. Okay, let me just show you. I read A Promised Land by Barack Obama. I read this because, one, it applies to my job. I work in healthcare, and so learning about the Affordable Health Care Act was super interesting to me. The other thing is, I wasn't involved in politics when I was in middle school, so I really don't know much about Obama. I don't know much about his campaign trail. And so I just was really interested. And I thought it was also cool that he narrated this on Audible, which is how I read this book. I listened to it actually. It was so nice to listen to. It's just like listening to a TED Talk for 28 hours. So I did give this book 5 stars. It's a fat boy, I will be honest. It's pretty thick. It kind of gives background on his whole life. So him as a child, and then growing up, and what got him so interested in politics, and then what eventually led him to campaign to be a senator, and then the president of the United States. And his story is just incredible. You learn a lot about Michelle too, which I thought was really cool, and it makes me want to read Michelle's books, so stay tuned. I might be reading that. I think it's told really well. It's not boring to read at all. This is only the first part, so I only learned about the first 4 years of his presidency. It is obviously very politically biased. I mean, he was the president of the United States. There's so many things that I was just so uneducated on, and I feel like I have at least a little bit of background now. I would recommend reading if you're interested in learning a little bit more about our nation's history. Pick it up. It's a big boy, but I did get this for $7.99. You want to know what this originally cost? $45. That's a steal. I also got it free on Audible with a trial. I really made out with that one. I started this new journey now. When I go on vacation, I try to pick out books that are based on the place I'm going to be vacationing, because I think it's really nice to kind of get some imagery and some history about the area that you're going to be visiting. So this next book is not based on where I visited. I looked and looked. So if anybody has any recommendations for books you can read when you go to Sonoma, please let me know. Or Napa. I can pretend. They're close enough. Instead, I chose to just go with Italy. That's kind of the same. It's wine country. Or maybe that's France. We're going to pretend. I think Napa is Italian. I read this book, One Italian Summer, by Rebecca Serle. If you read it, you'll want to go to the Italian coast. So the book is about a girl named Katie, and she has this very special relationship with her mother, and her mother unfortunately passes away. And so this book is kind of her going through the grieving process of losing her mother, who was also her best friend, and so much more really. And she feels just so lost. They've been planning this trip together, and then her mother gets sick and they can't go to Italy. But this was a very important place that they're visiting. It was very important to Katie's mother. She doesn't know why, but her mom spent time there when she was really young. Katie goes there, she goes alone. While she's there, she runs into her mother from 20 years ago. So all of a sudden, she's meeting this woman, and this woman does not know that that's her daughter, because that would be crazy, some sort of time travel thing. And so it's just her and her mom kind of rekindling, creating a friendship for the first time. It's just a really good story of her grieving and getting this extra time with her mom and figuring out her life, because she sort of has such a dependent relationship on her mom that she's never really had to think for herself, make decisions for herself. And I think she's kind of just having a crisis of, I don't even know what I like. I always just did what my mom liked, and so now I'm having to figure out what I like because my mom's not here anymore. I really like this book. Something Rebecca Serle does is she is really good at tapping into emotion. All of her books deal with grief, and so I always end up crying. This is no exception. It made me cry. I did give it 4 stars, and here's why. Rebecca Serle, she kind of writes in this way where I always end up finishing the book and being like, are you okay? Because all of your books are really sad in a weird way. I did feel like Katie's relationship with her mom was a little weird to me. I found it kind of weird to read about how dependent they were on each other. It kind of gave me the ick in a way. I would still recommend picking this up. It's a great fast read. It really does feel like a summer book, so I would still recommend. Another book I read this May was also super popular on TikTok, The Atlas Six by Olivia Blake. This book is about a world where people have magical powers. They can do different things. For example, like moving physical objects. So there's just like a lot of different magical powers, like telepathy, telekinesis. This book is about the Alexandrian Society, and this society is a secret society. It's made for the best skilled magical people in the world, non-muggles. They send out 6 invitations every year to the best non-muggles in the world, and only 5 will actually make it to initiation into this secret society. Definitely got dark academia vibes. It's definitely kind of sinister. I've had this feeling that the society's not all good and they're not just protecting knowledge, like there might be something else going on with them. There's 6 different points of view throughout the story because you're following the 6 people who get invited into the society, and they all have different powers for the most part. You're just like learning about how they're trying to manipulate each other. They also understand how to leverage each other's powers. Sometimes they don't even know the full extent of their own powers. I thought that was super interesting to read. The characters have such good perspectives. I thought they were all really well developed and complex. I got to know each of them. I got to know their motivations and also maybe their misgivings. I liked that aspect. The book was very complex. A lot of science-y things going on in here. I'm no physicist. I thought Olivia Blake did a great job of catching you up to speed and making a seemingly complex topic seem more simple. I liked how I wasn't able to guess the ending at all. I really did not know who was gonna make it to the end. So for that reason, I thought it was so good. Here's the dilemma. I did think the ending was a bit confusing, and I feel like it was a bit rushed. I gave it 4 stars. I think that there's a second book to this, so I will be picking it up because I feel like maybe that will help me with this whole feeling like the ending was rushed. This next book I read is The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. She also wrote The Alice Network. I really love the way Kate Quinn writes. She writes long books. I mean, this is pretty thick. And it's also a really floppy paperback, and it has those like rough edges. I mean, it's a good looking book. Similar to the Alice Network, it's set in World War II. It follows 3 women who are working together in the war effort. They all have such different backgrounds. One of them is a very wealthy, could-be socialite. One of them is kind of trying to marry up. And the other one, she's kind of been held back in her life by her parents. Her parents think she's dull, they think she'll never marry, and so she's never really thought that she could do anything or have a job, anything like that. This book is kind of set in 2 tenses. There's a present tense where one of the girls has been put away in prison for being a traitor and passing along coded messages to the Axis powers. And then there's the past tense, which is where you're seeing these journey of like these girls meeting when they're rooming together as billet mates and then going to work each day, and they're all in different sections at the intelligence center. Like they can't tell each other what each other's working on because they don't work in the same section. They're not allowed to talk about it outside of work. So you're following them throughout their time working there and what leads up to this event of someone being accused of being a traitor. Kate Quinn does such a good job developing her characters and making sure that you fall in love with each of them and understanding the different struggles they go through, the loves that they have throughout the war, and just what it might have been like to be working on the war front, and also to not be able to talk to anyone about what you're doing at your job and how isolating that might be at times. I love reading about unexpected ways that women have participated in history that don't get talked about a lot. So I just thought it was incredible to read. I rated it 4 stars. This next book is One Last Stop by Casey McKiston. It's about a girl named August, and she moves to New York City. She is kind of trying to escape her past. All of a sudden, she gets on the train one day and she runs into a girl named Jane. Jane is kind of the complete opposite of her. She's very edgy and cool. At first, she's like, okay, cool, I met this cool person on the train. And then she keeps getting on the same line because she goes to school every day, and Jane is always there on the train. This is not a stalker situation, it's just Jane is stuck on the train. You're trying to figure out why is she on the train, how can she get off the train. But I really had to push through this book. I didn't really care about the characters. August was okay. She was a little bit flat. There wasn't anything about her that I just loved or found endearing. I just thought she was kind of plain. I kind of felt the same way about Jane. They could have done so many cool things writing about Jane. Here's what I would have proposed for the book. What I think really would have been cool in this book is if it was a dual point of view, like a flashback scenario leading up to the time where she gets on the train and she gets stuck there. And then also talking about all of the different people that she's probably met throughout her time being on that train. And then flashing back to August in the present tense and her meeting Jane and what led like Jane's future from there. How did they fall in love? How they get off the train? That kind of thing. For me, this just didn't land. I gave it a 3 stars. And last but certainly not least, a book that I did not like, but I know is very beloved. Also, some fun little fact, Barack Obama liked this book. He said it was wildly imaginative. So I'm pretty disappointed that I didn't like it. The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. So this book follows an astrophysicist during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. She starts to work at this government lab. She has a very kind of limited role. She's not allowed to know a lot of stuff. She's sending signals out into outer space to see if there's some other form of life who will respond. One day, there is another form of life that does respond. Basically, this other form of life is like, don't respond unless you want us to come to Earth and take over. And she's so unhappy with the way the world is at the time that she's like, I'll do it. Let's just betray humanity as a whole. Who cares about them? They're worthless. I think that's a little bit where this book lost me. It's so misanthropic. It was like, wow, this girl just hated the human race. And I just think that's really hard to relate to and really weird. That was one of my biggest criticisms of this book, is the characters were so cold. They had no emotions. They felt no remorse for any actions. I didn't like it. I honestly have such a hard time explaining this book because it was so complicated. Maybe for a smarter audience, I'm sure. Anyways, 3 stars. I'm not continuing the series, even though I've heard the rest of the books are better than this one. It's not for me. There's too many books in this world to continue series that you're not super interested in. That is all the books I read. That's it. That's all. Not even that many, really. Maybe only 8. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. I had so much fun sharing all the books I read in May, and I would love to hear what you read in May. So please feel free to subscribe, like, comment below, and I will talk to you again next month when I share my June monthly wrap-up.